Samuel, and I'm 4 years old.
My name is Lisa Morales. I've been married to my husband Mark for 12 years. Samuel was born on November the 24th, 2015.
It was quite an experience. Pretty emotional for me because it's gonna be neat, you know, the things that I could only imagine what kind of life we were gonna have with him.
We drove to Rangi, and when we got home, I was going to take him out of his bassinet, and I noticed that he was crying, but it was a different cry. It was kind of like a shriek, you know, like he was in pain, he was hurting. I noticed his legs, they were turning purple. There was no blood flow, I guess you could say. I called for my husband.
I heard my name Mark really loud. And so I went to the bedroom and she has Samuel. She says, he's not right, something's not right. Look at his legs.
And I said, we need to go to the hospital now. By the time I put Samuel in the car seat, and it was just a few feet and only a few seconds, he was already turning purple. And his face, he was crying. He was trying to cry so hard and trying to scream.
At this time as a dad, my thing is just get to the hospital safely because it's raining.
I told my husband, I said, call 911 because we're not gonna make it. I didn't know what was wrong with him, but he was already so blue in his lips and he stopped crying.
And I could hear Lisa saying, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my God, oh my God. This isn't happening, this isn't happening.
I could hear my husband on the phone with the dispatcher.
And she says, 911 emergency, how can I help you? I said, we have a newborn baby, we just got home, something's not right with him. She's like, no, we're on the way to the hospital. And it's like a 20-minute drive to the nearest hospital. And she got back on the phone with me, says, okay, they're on the way. They're gonna meet you on the way, they've got their lights on, they've got their sirens on.
I took Samuel out of the car seat, I laid him on my lap, and he stopped breathing. I shook him, I rubbed his chest, I called his name over and over. My husband, I could hear him telling me, do it, Lisa, do it. He was telling me to give him CPR.
She's a nurse, and I say, do what you're trained to do. But I say it in a loud voice. And I just yell, I said, do what you're trained to do. And I'm thinking in my mind, she's to give CPR to your own kid.
I'm CPR certified, but I've never had to give CPR to an infant, you know, much less my own child. I gave him chest compressions, and I gave him 2 breaths. I could see his chest just rise up. And I gave him compressions again, 2 breaths. And when I looked up, I could hear sirens. At the time, I could hear sirens.
I can see the lights coming to us in the distance. I just feel some kind of relief that I know that help's coming. You know, we're not alone.
And I gave him 2 breaths, and then at that time, the door opened. And it was one of the EMT from the ambulance. And he immediately took Samuel out of my hands and ran with him to the back of the ambulance.
They lay him down on the gurney, they lay him down there. And as soon as the EMT looks at him, he looks at me, he looks at the other EMT, he says, we gotta go now. And so they, I remember a police officer coming up. I hear him say, we need roads blocked to the hospital. And so the cop cars were just blocking every traffic, everyone, any uncommon traffic all the way. It was like something you see in the movies. I'd never seen anything like it.
They were trying to get an IV line in him. They couldn't get anything. They couldn't get blood. They couldn't really do a whole lot for him on the way. We got to the hospital. There was a team waiting. Immediately, the doctor laid eyes on him and told a clerk or somebody that was working there to call for Air Life to get him to a bigger hospital. The clerk comes back and says, she said, they're not coming. And the doctor turned, he looked at her, he goes, what do you mean? She goes, they can't fly. The weather was bad. She said, they'll be here in 3 hours. He turned and he yelled at her and he goes, we don't have 3 hours.
My family's there, my brother's there. He's praying as well. I just backed myself into a corner. And I said, God, don't take Samuel from us.
And the team, they were great. They never left his side. There was a very specific nurse. I remember him saying, I'm not giving up on him.
I'm not. And like he's adamant, I'm not giving up on him. And so I just felt like, okay, we're in this. Like people are fighting for us right here, right now to keep our son alive.
They were able to get a little bit of blood. They were able to see that his cardiac enzymes were very high. That showed that he had a heart attack.
And I can hear a door open, and I look up to my left.
And then comes in a nurse, a specialized transport nurse, NICU nurse, a respiratory therapist, and 2 EMT guys from San Antonio. And she took one look at us and she said, I'm gonna take care of Samuel for you. They were able to provide medication for him to get the heart, I guess maybe at a stable rate or to function enough to get us to the bigger hospital where there was a NICU unit. When we got to the hospital, there was another team waiting for us. The chaos started again. All the questions, all the things that they were gonna do. We're gonna spinal tap him. We're going to check everything. We're gonna be doing MRIs. We're gonna be everything you can think of. But it was really early in the morning, maybe 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning when there was a knock at the door. It was a doctor. And she came in and she said, my name is Dr. Borgman. She said, I'm the cardiologist. I was really confused at the time. I looked at my husband and I said, I'm sorry, cardiologist? And she said, Samuel is very, very sick. And I just started crying. I started crying, my husband started crying, she even cried. And then she started to show us all of the things that were wrong with Samuel's heart. And it wasn't just one thing wrong, there was multiple things wrong. Like, his kidneys were not functioning, his liver, he had a collapsed lung, he was on a breathing machine, nothing else was working for Samuel. Those things had to get better or at least somewhat stabilized before they could even talk about an open heart surgery. He was a superstar of the NICU at the time because he just overcame many obstacles. And little by little, tubes and wires started to come off.
I did have to go back to work. And on the second day that I had been back, Lisa had spoken to the surgeon.
He started to explain to me the surgery that he was going to have. He goes, yes, Samuel is going to be an organ donor recipient. His whole aortic arch is going to be grafted from organ tissue from a donor. They had told us the surgery was going to be around 4 hours or so. Then they called and told us that he was on bypass. That was probably the hardest update that I had to receive. I stepped out of the waiting room and I went upstairs to the chapel, to the hospital chapel. I got on my knees and I just said, Lord, he's yours. As much as I don't want to give him to you, he's yours. And then they called again to say that everything went well and that the doctor was closing him back up. Dr. Borgman walks into the waiting room. And she smiled and she said, Samuel did great. She goes, things are looking great. We were able to do everything that we needed to do. I was nervous coming home. I had actually asked the nurse if she would come and stay with me. We had family come over and we watched the fireworks from the window. The first night, I didn't sleep. It lasted several months of just watching him sleep at night, making sure that he was breathing. I was constantly watching his lips to see if they were the right color, and I was checking his toes to make sure they were the right color.
We ended up purchasing a device that we could put onto his foot. It'll read his satting and his oxygen and whatnot. It had an app, and I put that on my phone, so I remember being at work the following days or months and just looking at my phone constantly.
I think as the days passed and taking him to his doctor's appointments and hearing from his doctors, from his cardiologist that he was doing well, I think that helped reassuring that, okay, we're okay. And it was kind of the norm of having a heart baby around.
And I remember as the second surgery came, I had grown a lot closer to Samuel, of course, than when he was first born. And so the fear of losing my son came back.
It was gonna be a big surgery because they were trying to avoid him only having one ventricle. Because if they were gonna make him a single ventricle heart, then there was gonna come another series of surgeries after that. When the surgery was complete, Dr. Borgman came out again and she smiled and she said it was a success. Plan A. We were able to do everything we needed to do without difficulty, with no complications.
I always wanted a baby brother.
Him coming into my life means everything. I've learned a lot from him, and I'm way older.
Yeah, he's funny. He's very playful.
Just being around him brings me joy.
He just taught me to never give up.
Because of the American Heart Association and the research, we are able to have Samuel today. He was able to go through 2 open heart surgeries, a heart cath, receive an organ donation, and actually have CPR outside of the hospital. And we owe all of that to the American Heart Association and the research that it does.